Merry Christmas. It's good to see you. If you have your Bibles, open them to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9. Well, if you are like me, you've probably been listening to Christmas music for about a month now. And after 2.5 hours of it and driving yesterday, I'm almost done with Christmas music. Almost. One of the more well-known Christmas songs from long ago is I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. You've heard this song, you probably sang it before, but I don't know that you know the story behind it. Unless I've shared this story before and I just forgot, which is a possibility as well. So if you have heard it, just pretend like this is the first time you're hearing it. In March of 1863, an 18-year-old Charles Appleton Longfellow walked out of his family's house and went and joined the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. Charles was the oldest of 6 children, born to Fanny Elizabeth Appleton and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. You know Longfellow as the celebrated literary critic and poet. Charles had 5 younger siblings, a brother and 3 sisters, and another sibling who had passed away as an infant. 2 years prior to this, Charles's mother, Miss Fanny, tragically died in a horrific way. So in their home one day, her dress caught on fire. And as she caught on fire, Henry, the husband and the father, attempted to go and put the fire out. And he eventually just laid on top of her, trying to use his own body to put out the flames, but it was too late, and she passed away just the next morning. Well, Charles went on to war. And eventually, a letter came to Henry telling him that his oldest son had been badly wounded in a battle and was about to undergo surgery. Preparing for this, Henry, along with another brother, went to Washington, D.C. to go and take care of him. They were going to go provide the support that he needed and bring him home after the surgery was over. The surgery was a pretty serious one. In fact, they didn't know if he was going to make it out. A bullet had gone through his back and his shoulder blade and had lodged back there close to his spine. And so they weren't sure if the oldest son was going to make it or not. And as they were waiting for the surgery to be over and to go and get Charles, Henry, as you can imagine, was in a place of despair. He had lost his wife, and as far as he knew, he was about to lose his oldest son. In the midst of a war-torn country where nobody knew what was going to happen at that point. Tragedy, despair, discouragement, disappointment. These are all words that we are well familiar with. We experience those emotions daily, sometimes weekly, monthly, and certainly in different seasons of our life, don't we? As joyful as the Christmas season is, it can also be one of the most depressing times for some. For those who have lost loved ones, this will be the first Christmas without fill in the blank. Christmas will never be the same. We won't go to the same places. We won't see the same faces. It's just going to be different. And so the same emotions that were going through Henry Longfellow's mind and heart in Washington, D.C., as he was hearing the sounds of war all around him, waiting to hear whether or not his son was going to live, he wrote this poem, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. Longfellow wrote this, and in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. Man, I don't know about you. You may be there right now. I know I've been there. In that place where I hung my head in despair and said, there is no peace on earth. In a place of questioning, in a place of uncertainty and chaos and confusion, not knowing which way to turn. And even hearing this message our whole lives, that if you'll just trust God and do the right things, then everything will work out for you. And well, we did that, and it didn't. Tragedy still came. Hurt and pain still came. So either I just did it wrong or it didn't work out for me. So we hang our heads in despair, thinking there is absolutely no peace. And everyone who says there is just kidding themselves. We know how this feels, don't we? Because we live in a world that is longing for peace. Well, this morning we finished our series of looking at the names of the coming King in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. The prophet Isaiah says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." Let's pray. Father, we know what Longfellow was going through. We know the hurt and the pain of his heart, because we each feel that same pain. Whether we are feeling it even at this moment, or we have, or we certainly will again, because of the condition of our own hearts, because of the condition of the world around us, we will be in despair because of chaos, the uncertainty, the commotions of a fallen world around us. It will tempt us to fall into despair. But I pray this morning, Father, that the news of the coming King as the Prince of Peace will absolutely, radically change the way we look at this world. That it'll change the way that we look at our own despair, our own hearts, our own lives, and the world around us. I pray that you would transform our hearts this morning by the renewing of our minds through your holy word. In Christ's name, amen. Because we live in a world that is longing for peace, Prince of Peace is a wonderful name. Through this series, I've attempted to answer the question of why Jesus coming is good news. Why do we spend so much time celebrating the coming of Christ? Now, we certainly do that at Easter. We celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But why do we celebrate the coming of Jesus? Why should we lift this to a place of every single day in our lives? Why do we have all of these songs that are attributed to the joy of the world because of Christ, the coming King? Why? Why is it good news? And I've attempted to answer that question from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, and the four names of the coming King. If you remember, the time of Israel right now is a time of uncertainty and chaos. Now, they have had a good king, but the one that they have now will and did ultimately lead them back into a place of bondage again. He flipped out. He didn't listen to God. He didn't take the wise counsel of Isaiah, false gods and idols, trying to get out of that between a rock and a hard place kind of moment. And God did not bless that, and the people suffered greatly for it. And so there was uncertainty and chaos. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so in the midst of that, God tells the people, I know that things are chaotic and uncertain now, but hold on, because help is on the way. Help is on the way. And the help that was coming is Christ. For to us a child is born. Now think about this. In the midst of uncertainty and chaos, God is attempting to give the people a sense of peace by telling them one day a baby is going to be born that's going to fix all this mess. You look to Him. You look to Him for the comfort and the peace in uncertain and chaotic times. You look to Him to be reminded that I have not forgotten you and I'm not giving up on you. Things will continue to be chaotic and uncertain. Listen to me. Things will continue to be chaotic and uncertain. So you hold on, because help is on the way. And so we finish this morning with the Prince of Peace. There are two tasks of the Prince of Peace. There are two things that Christ coming as the Prince of Peace is going to accomplish. Now, we live in a day and time where, especially politicians, they enjoy making lots and lots of promises. They make lots of promises about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and what's going to be accomplished for that. And we know the letdown that comes when the things that they promise ultimately don't come true. So Jesus Christ is the wonderful Counselor, mighty God, and everlasting Father. And as the focus of our attention in this sermon today, He is the Prince of Peace. He is the one who actually brings peace into the world and into our lives. This is God's shalom. Now, have you ever been reading through the Old Testament and you got through reading a psalm or you got through reading a prayer and there was this word on the end of it that said shalom? You're like, what in the world does that mean? Well, I don't really know. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I'll just go on to the next chapter and hope maybe I figure it out after that. Well, what we're going to look at for just a moment is what that word means and why it's important for you and I to understand. What a wonderful word this word shalom is. It has all of the ideas of peace that we understand in the English language, but it includes a whole lot more. You see, a lot of times when people today talk about peace, they talk about this inner tranquility that we can just get through. We can tell ourselves and convince ourselves that things are okay just long enough to where we can get through this mess. Or if we'll just think positive thoughts, if we'll be really positive with ourselves, right? If we look into the mirror and we say, okay, I am healthy, even though we're really not. Or we tell ourselves that things are okay, even when they're not okay. If we'll just be positive, if we'll speak positive things into our life, the world tells us that eventually those things will come true. Well, I don't know if you figured it out yet or not, but this world is chaotic and uncertain. It's been that way for a long time, and it'll continue to be that way until Christ, the Prince of Peace, comes and fixes it all. You see, this inner tranquility, telling yourself that things are okay, trying to convince yourself in a positive language format, is not the kind of peace that I'm talking about today. The kind of peace that we're talking about today is this comprehensive shalom peace. It's what the Old Testament prophets like Isaiah had envisioned for the future. I want you to listen to this definition or this idea of this peace from a man named Plantinga. He said they dreamed, talking about the Old Testament prophets, much like Isaiah, they dreamed of a new age in which human crookedness would be straightened out, rough places made plain. The foolish would be made wise, and the wise humble. They dreamed of a time when the deserts would flower, the mountains would run with wine, weeping would cease, and people could go to sleep without weapons on their laps. People would work in peace and work to fruitful effect. Lambs could lie down with lions. All nature would be fruitful, benign, and filled with wonder upon wonder. All humans would be knit together in brotherhood and sisterhood. And all nature and all humans would look to God, walk with God, lean toward God, and delight in God. Shouts of joy and recognition would well up from the valleys and seas, from women in streets and from men on ships. The writer continues and he says that the webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight is what the Hebrew prophets called shalom. It's just where everything is right. and everything is good again. And you don't have to wonder the intentions of someone that is having a conversation with us or asking something of us any longer. That shalom is the kind that the Prince of Peace would bring. And according to Isaiah, he would do it in two ways. First of all, if you look back to verses 4 and 5 of Isaiah chapter 9, he says this, "For the yoke of his burden," this is talking about the coming Christ, "and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire." You see, first of all, the Prince of Peace will achieve this peace by ending all war. He's going to end all war because he's going to come in and he's going to take this yoke of burden and place it on himself, and he's going to break it. If you'll remember from Isaiah chapter 46, that God is going to make things right by putting an absolute end to all war. Secondly, he's going to extend the well-being. He's going to promote safety and security of human flourishing. Look in verse 7. "Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. And on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore." The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. It was set firm in this foundation of Christ since before the foundations of the earth were laid. It's eternal. It's much like when God, when the New Testament reflects on our redemption. It is secured. It's secure. The work of Christ is secured. It can't be wavered. It can't be undone. And the same peace that Christ is going to bring in, there's not going to be an end to it. And he's going to establish it. He's going to establish it, and then he's going to continue to promote it for the rest of eternity. So he's the one that's going to start it, sustain it, and nothing's going to end it. And he's going to do this with justice and with righteousness. He's going to do it with justice and with righteousness. This means there's no loopholes. Today, if you do something wrong, right? If you do something wrong, there is very well a loophole that you can get out of it. You can find the grayish area. You see, when the Prince of Peace establishes his reign of peace that will have no end, there will be no loopholes. There will be no unending to it. There will be no gray area in his peace. This is his twofold task. You see, the way that he will put our world to right is a process of peacemaking that Christians believe began at the birth of Christ. This is why we celebrate Christ coming as the Prince of Peace. He came to establish it. Jesus said, "If I came, and I will return the same way that I go up." It's the promise, this peace. So what's the big deal about the coming peace? You say, "Nathan, I'm not a soldier." We certainly may know someone who is in the armed forces, but I'm not. I'm not in harm's way daily. I don't fight in any battles. Why should I care that God is going to end war? Why should I really care about the prosperity and the well-being and the security that is going to come one day? I'm doing pretty well right now. We see, not only does the Prince of Peace coming bring peace to the world around us, not only is he going to recreate this peace that was established in Genesis chapter 1, he also brings peace with us and himself. Because here's the reality. There is no amount of legislation, there is no amount of criminal reform that can take place that's going to end chaos. In a recent conversation with some people in law enforcement, they were talking about some different philosophies and ideas of criminal reform. We were having this conversation, the problem with the judicial system, the loopholes, how people were getting out. We were talking about how some police officers, they're not even encouraged to arrest people anymore, because sometimes when they arrest them, the criminals will beat them home. They arrest them and the judicial system sends them right back out. Well, here's the problem. Our judicial system cannot fix that problem of chaos and uncertainty. There is no amount of freedom that our police officers, that our men and women in service can have to do what they need to do that's going to fix our problems of uncertainty and chaos. We can't build enough prisons. We can't have enough different philosophical criminal reforms to try to fix the problems of our society. It's not going to happen. You see, the problem lies within each and every one of our hearts. You see, the Prince of Peace must begin his work within us. The Prince of Peace has to begin his work of bringing peace to this world in your heart and in mine. You see, the thing is we are at war with God. In our sin, we are at war with God. We are at war with God because of our sin. We are combatants with God. You see, this is our condition apart from saving grace found in Jesus Christ. You see, I love you too much to downplay the effects of your sin. Your sin makes you an enemy with God. Your sin doesn't just make you dirty. Your sin doesn't just make you sick. Your sin makes you dead and enemies with God. See, Romans 8:7 says, "For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed," listen to me, "it cannot." You see, the reality of the chaos and the uncertainty that our world knows is not because there is a battle of good versus evil. It is because there is evil in our hearts. We are at war with God. We are separated from everything that is good, righteous, and holy. If you don't believe me, if you don't believe in original sin, if you don't believe that your heart is wretched from the first moment that you breathe a breath, you're saying, "Nathan, no, people are basically just good." People are basically good. Now, I know some bad people, but for the most part, people are good. If you don't believe me, have a baby. Have a baby. Say, "Nathan, what in the world are you talking about?" I'm not the best dad. I prove that daily. But I try to be a pretty good dad. Because here's the problem. My kids are liars. Walls, why did you do that? I didn't do it. Now, I'm not the best dad, but I can tell you one thing for sure. I didn't teach my kid to lie. Right?
Right.
So why does he do it? Because as precious as he is, his heart is depraved. He is separated from righteousness. There's evil lurking in his precious little heart. Because the same evil that's in his heart is the same evil that's in mine. That's why I pray this prayer every single night over them. Father, preserve them for your glory. Because the only way that their life will turn out to be righteous is if at one moment in their life they respond to the calling of the Prince of Peace.
Amen.
See, that's the condition of our world. Condition of our world is not because there are just some evil people in it, because it is full of evil people. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. You see, whether we are fully aware of it or not, and most of the time we're not, there is a deep-seated internal hostility toward God in every fallen human being. And because of that, we instinctively suppress the truth about God. Because even a moment ago, when I began to talk about that, you were telling yourself in your heart, no, that's not true. It can't be true. People are basically good. We learn from Romans chapter 1, we have the knowledge of an intelligent creator who made the heavens and the earth and created us. See, it's like if you had a falling out with someone, and whenever that person is near, you have a hard time acknowledging their presence. Come on now. Let's be honest with ourselves. Have you ever had a falling out with someone? They did something, or they're just a person, you're like, I just don't like that human being, I don't like that person, and whenever they're around you, you have a difficulty acknowledging their presence, even though you know they're there. We do the same thing to God. We rationalize our sin. We tell ourselves that it's not that big of a deal. We convince ourselves that if somebody else wouldn't have done what they did, then we wouldn't have had to do what we did. And we convince ourselves that it's okay. But that's not how we get peace. That's not how we get peace. You see, here's the good news that I have to give you this morning. You don't have to rationalize your sin. You don't have to convince yourself that everything is going to be okay, even though it's not. You don't have to convince yourself that it's okay, even though in your heart you are at war with yourself. You lie awake at night staring at the ceiling because you can't rest enough to go to sleep. Romans chapter 5, verse 6, for while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows His love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by His blood, much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son, much more now that we are reconciled shall we be saved by His life. Much more than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we now have received reconciliation. That's the good news of the gospel. That's why Christ coming as the Prince of Peace is good news, because you and I were enemies with God, and God took the initiative toward His enemies to satisfy His own wrath through His Son, Jesus Christ. Since therefore we have now been justified by His blood, much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. Listen to verse 10. For if while we were enemies, enemies with who? Enemies with God. Uncertainty, chaotic enemies with God. In that moment, we've been reconciled. In that moment, we've been made whole. Wrath of God. We learn this from Romans chapter 3. We know verse 23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood. That just means that he satisfied the wrath of God on your behalf.
Thank you, Jesus.
He gave you the ultimate gift of salvation. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift. Now, I know that those socks that you're going to get tomorrow morning are awesome, and you can't wait to show them off, but they're not as great as the gift of salvation that God put forward to make you right with him. Jesus Christ satisfied the wrath of God on your behalf and on mine. We who once were enemies with God have been brought near to him through the righteousness of Christ. We're sinners, we're enemies. God's wrath was pointed right at our hearts, justifiably right at us. I love what Paul says, for while we were still weak, at the right time, at that moment when God would have been fully right and justifiable to condemn us, at that moment, Jesus Christ stepped into the flesh. He came, set his glory aside in heaven, and came and put on your flesh and my flesh, and completely satisfied the wrath of God for us. It's no better news. It's no better news. It's what gives us joy. It's what makes us right with him. That's what gives me joy in the midst of even knowing the reality of my sin and the sin of those around me. I can have peace with God. I can have joy with God because I know in his love and in his mercy and in his grace, he has made provision for all other enemies of God through the finished work of Christ. John chapter 16, verse 33. Jesus is preparing the disciples for him being gone. He's going to go to the cross, which they don't understand yet. He's going to be resurrected from the grave and ascending into heaven. And he says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Why does he say that you'll have peace? Because you will face trouble in this world. Jesus says that's the reality, period. Trouble's coming. But I have overcome the world. I've overcome the world. So for Jesus and the disciples, and now for us today, the good news of Jesus coming as the Prince of Peace reminds us that not only is he going to establish an eternal kingdom of peace that will have no end, but he's also established peace within our own hearts even now. Even now, we have peace. Last night, before going to bed, I read Habakkuk chapter 3. Habakkuk chapter 3, this is his prayer. And this is the end of his prayer, and Habakkuk's rejoicing in the Lord. He says, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, there be no herd in the stalls. Listen to me. That's the uncertainty and the chaos that comes with a fallen world full of enemies with God. That's not where his prayer ends. See, this is where his prayer ends. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. See, what Habakkuk is saying is, I'm going to rest in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. I'm going to rest. Listen to me. Listen to me. I'm going to rest in the finished work of Christ. And that's my plea to you today. It's in the midst of uncertainty and chaos, I'm pleading to you to rest in the finished work of Christ. I know you have uncertainty and chaos in your life. You don't need to prove that case to me. I already know it's there. Those are not the things we need to work through. What we need to work through this morning is you learning to rest in the finished work of Jesus. Knowing that Christ came and put on flesh, lived a perfect life, went to the cross, paid your price of sin to God on your behalf, was resurrected from the grave 3 days after his death, ascended into heaven. We have this promise and this hope that he's coming back. And he's going to establish a kingdom, a reign of peace that will have no end. My plea to you today is to rest in that. You see, if you rest in that, there is no tragedy, there's no news, there's no uncertainty, there's no chaos, listen to me, that can shake you. If you'll just rest in Jesus. If you'll rest in his finished work. So what about our friend Longfellow? And outside of having an awesome last name, what did he do? See, after he wrote those words, and in despair I bowed my head, there is no peace on earth, I said, this is what he wrote next. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. The angels that night, in the same region that Christ was being born, said, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. For today, city of David, a baby is born. He'll be a wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He's establishing a kingdom that will have no end. That you can rest assured there will be one established in peace, justice, and righteousness. So the same news that the angels brought, good news of great joy that will be to all people, is the same news that we bring to you today. The gospel of Jesus Christ.